Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the conceptual work that is going on with respect to the measurement of resilience, and really from the perspective of looking at the measurement of the impact of investments in terms of enhanced resilience, because that's really where the technical consortium works. So we are looking very much to harness some of the more conceptualization of analytical frameworks for resilience and translate that into application. So what I and some colleagues have done a cursory review of some of the more contemporary works on measurement of resilience. And really we looked at, there's a REMA index which is put out by FAO. There's another approach which is put out by Barrett and Constas, which really looks at metrics and frameworks for measuring resilience. And then finally, there's the Tango approach. And really what we found was the current efforts really focus on food security as an outcome. So we have because we are not necessarily so concerned with measuring impact of investments towards food security, and we're much more looking at it from a broader perspective. We found that that isn't the most useful way to measure it. And we also, we work in a very practical environment in the sense that we engage as the technical consortium with member states to work with them on their drylands investments and how to roll out those investments and eventually measure impact towards resilience. Now, these are some of the problems, or rather sort of this is the scenario in which we work. The governments in the Horn of Africa need to be able to attribute their investments in some way towards enhanced impact of resilience of their populations. However, we lack rationale to determine a prioritization of investment. We also lack empirical information in the form of baseline data. In a lot of ways, although there is a lot of data in the Horn, what we lack is data that is appropriate to put into a baseline to be now able to measure, to establish the baseline for measuring the progress of investments against. So again, that's one of the things we're working on. And also, even at the more conceptual analytical level, we haven't quite agreed on what the indicators for development resilience really look like. So we are engaged, for example, with the Resilience Measurement Technical Working Group, and they're really looking more at the conceptualization of resilience measurement, and what we're asking for is, okay, can you help us now translate that down so we can work with member state governments and they can understand how now to put this into action. So we define resilience as the capacity to ensure that shocks and stressors do not have long-term adverse development consequences. And in particular, I'd like to stress this. We want to stress that, that it enables support to trajectories enhancing growth and prosperity. So in other words, it's not enough just to bounce back. It's not enough if you are underneath a threshold, which is already poor, to bounce back to that suboptimal level. Now, you may do so, and in doing so, you may be resilient, but the point about that is, are you able to continue on a trajectory which is eventually resulting in growth and prosperity? So, oh dear. One of the ways that we are working with the member state governments is to try and look at impact pathway monitoring. Because we're working with the governments on a scale where the impact of these investments is not going to be felt for perhaps another 20 years. We're not going to see changes in standard development indicators such as health, nutrition, education, etc., which is what we're really measuring against. So we're looking at it in terms of enhanced resilience will really be reflected in terms of changes within the standard development indicator, but we'll have a much better idea of which of those indicators contributes better to resilience. In other words, which is the most important in the equation for a particular population. Resilience is highly contextual, and in an applied context, we have to be able to isolate those characteristics for that population, which may enable it to become more or less resilient. So we're working with the member states to get them really to focus on the linking or the validation of a relationship between an investment and an impact. So when you are measuring at scales that are 20 years plus, it's very difficult, because of the influence of many external variables, to be able to say at the end of the 20-year period, I and my project had a direct impact on that variable. You're going to have what's called an attribution gap. But what you have along the way are opportunities to continually validate your assumed relationship between your investment and your intended and assumed outcome. So we're working with governments to try and plan projects in such a way that they have options to constantly revisit that relationship. And if you're off course, adjust course. That's the point, is we're not so much going to be able to say, my project made the difference, but you're going to be able to look at an opportunity for alternative interventions should you need to. Should your project not be heading in the direction you think is right, you now have the opportunity to shift course and change things. So really the way we are we've got the project, then we've got the impact monitoring side, and I just want to show you this last slide, very much, well, it won't be the last, but very much looking at how the contribution of many different projects make a difference in the impact indicator. So the point about this is, it's not going to be one project that has changes in the impact indicator at the end. It's going to be the convergence of many projects. And we want to be able to measure that and to understand how those projects contribute to those indicators. So this diagram is really trying to explain that you have investments and they may be even in different sectors. You may have one investment in education, one in health, one in irrigation, for example. And it is the combination of those investments that makes the difference. The other thing I want to point out is most of us think about, particularly for development resilience, at measuring it at the level of the household. Whereas I'm not suggesting measuring necessarily everything at different levels. The household is a good unit. However, when we're talking about things like extensive livestock production systems, the dynamics of those systems do not occur at household level. So you need to, while you don't necessarily need to measure those indicators at the systems level, you need to be cognizant of their relationship with, as a production activity, with the household level living standard, for example. So it's not good enough just to measure the household level and say, we are resilient, et cetera, or not, or these levels have changed in these indicators. This is where, because I'm approaching this very much from a development resilient perspective, my colleagues are going to bring in a more systems-oriented perspective. And what I'm saying is, I think successful development resilience is a combination of the systems perspective and the more standard development indicators, sustainable development perspective. It's very much going to be, you have to be aware of what's going in the systems, and how they affect your indicators. But it's not necessarily about systems resilience in itself and maintaining resilient systems. In fact, it may be negative to maintain resilience in those systems. So you have to be aware of what's going on in order to understand the impact of various different variables on your standard impact indicators. I think that's probably enough. And if anyone has any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katie.